let me say this here. I'm not even allowed to talk about Hex with any clients. I'm not allowed to say anything about it because it's so not a security and it is not within our wheelhouse to deal with. And to further reaffirm Katie's points here, and let me direct this to any Hexican out here who is kind of worried about this and maybe losing sleep over it, you got to understand just how pitiful this case is. Because if it's deemed not a security, or if they cannot prove that it is a security, then the SEC has zero jurisdiction on the whole thing because they are not the Gucci and Louis Vuitton Exchange Commission. They are the Securities Exchange Commission. If it's not a security, they have zero power, zero authority or anything to be able to speak to this. So this is going to be forgotten within a few months or so, and it's going to be one of those things where we'll look back on it and laugh. What I encourage you Hexicans to do is take screenshots of all the haters and all the crap they are talking right now so we can rub it in their faces later. I'm currently doing that with somebody that I used to have so much respect for, and I am so disappointed in, Eric Voorhees. Eric, if you hear this, I'm challenging you to a discussion. You and I, let's get on a Twitter space or a live stream. You try to tell me what's not meritorious about Hex. I will correct you and convince you that you're not correct.
Like, that's just another thing that people need to remember, right? Hex is limited because it is so decentralized, right? Like, if you look at centralized exchange volumes, like that comment about you can't delist the unlisted, what can the SEC really do to us, right? Well, what can they really do? Like, at the end of the day, like, people panic sold out of FUD, but realistically, there really isn't centralized exchange volume for Hex. There has never been. It's always been decentralized, right? Decentralized exchanges have the volume for Hex. It's always been the way. We don't have many centralized exchange listings because we've never needed them. We transact on chain and we make interactions with an immutable smart contract holding our own keys. So at what point can there be a middle party or a centralized entity that says you can't do that? We transact completely decentralized. Where is the point in time where someone's going to stop you from doing it, right? So people panic sell out of FUD, or maybe they try and speculate that it could drop lower and they could buy back in. But at the end of the day, what are they actually going to do with one of the most decentralized communities that there is? Pulldownhex.com. That's fine. There's 40 other front ends for Hex. You can go interact with the contract on Etherscan if you really wanted to. Like, those are the questions that you also need to ask yourself, is what can they actually do? Because there isn't that much that they can do.
Just want to remind everyone of a couple of points. One is when we had the crash in 2008, those people who were freaking out that they lost everything and sold at the bottom because they desperately tried to get their money out of the system lost everything because they missed out on all the growth that followed afterwards. They took themselves out of the equation in a very emotional state versus staying in the market and sticking to a plan that they hopefully already had in place before and cost themselves dearly in the future. So I just want to challenge everybody to take time to really try to bring the emotion out of the equation, to lay out a plan for what it is that you want to do in crypto, in your personal finances, in your life. And, you know, especially when it comes to like, when do you sell, when do you take profits, have a plan in advance so that you're not constantly rolling the dice and letting it ride and gambling every step along the way and then regretting those decisions every step along the way, right? And the only other thing I just want to mention is just no matter what's going on with an SEC lawsuit, et cetera, like Katie was saying just a minute ago, these are distributed, decentralized networks and tools, right? Hex and Pulsechain are not going to be shut down tomorrow, right? We have validators running all over the world, right? Richard Hart shut down the validators that their team started with. So now it is completely run by the community, right? Hex succeeds because of the community. It is not Richard Hart. It is the community behind these things. So we just need to keep perspective that, yes, okay, this might be a very public thing, but we are still the ones driving it. We are still the ones using it. We are still the ones promoting it and keeping it alive. And it is about this community more than it is about any one member of the community. So just keep your heads up. Hopefully, don't let your emotions rule you, and just Just keep a rational approach to everything. We'll get through this. The volatility we're seeing is exactly why we're in crypto in the first place. So you got to take the good with the bad, and we'll get through it.
Yeah, I think LV brought up a really good point that I just want to go back to is about money and when to exit, and that people are here for profit, right? Anybody that says they're not, again, is lying. People invest or they put their money into something for profit, right? We are all here for returns. People like me, and I know many in the room, definitely like the technology as well, right? But we put money in for profit, right? To possibly have that potential to speculate on an asset. That's us as a person, right? That doesn't define something as a security. Again, right? It goes back to the Howie test. And I've been in a couple of Twitter spaces and I've just left them because they refuse to talk about the Howie test. But it all does go back to the Howie test because that's what defines something as a security, right? If Gary Gensler wants to come after you, he needs to explain why you and your asset, like you as the founder, why your asset is a security. Do you put money into a common pool with the expectations? Does the founder have managerial and entrepreneurial effort put in to give people a promise of returns? And does your asset have a likeness to something that is a security, right? If you fail all of those things, saying that people invest for profit, that doesn't deem something a security, right? Like Bitcoin was just deemed not a security, but everybody puts money into Bitcoin hoping for returns, right? People put money into Bitcoin because it's safer returns, right? Maybe lower returns, but it's safer, right? It's safer profit for them, but they still do it for profit, right? So to say that you're not here to make money is irrelevant, right? Because you're lying. But to try and base a thesis of that deem something a security based on that fact alone, you just don't have grounds for it. So those people are wasting their breath, right? Like, again, ask for transaction hashes and ask for facts because you need them to provide them now if they're going to keep saying it.
I'm not sure if we can talk about Pulsechain because it says here the case of Hex, but I agree with everyone that Hex is likely, very, very likely not a security. But I listen to all these Hex spaces in the community, and it seems like an echo chamber, and they're not really appealing to the outside because to anyone on the outside, Pulsex and PLS, for all intents and purposes, they were ICOs. Even though Richard says no expectation, I know people that expected profit from the work of developers to develop Pulsechain. And I think this is where a lot of people...
So I'm going to stop you again, right? I said provide facts of the founder. So when you're talking about work of others, right, that is the founder of the asset, right? There is no question about the developer doing the work to develop the product, right? Otherwise, every single thing is a security already, right? So a developer developing a product doesn't classify as the work of other people. That's just building and developing and delivering a product, right? The work of others comes from, again, going back to the Howie test and around it. No expectations from the work of others is when people put money into a common pool with the expectations, which is when, say, for instance, those people go reinvest that money and promise you a return, right? Or there's managerial and entrepreneurial efforts by the founder of the asset to promote their product. Okay, so I will have to stop you, and because you need to bring me facts of where Richard promoted, right? Where Richard gave you expectations of profit, where he told you that he would put that money to work for you, because everything that I know to be true is him saying the opposite. So when I say, like, you can say echo chamber all you want, but for this space, it's just about facts, right? If you can bring me a fact to prove otherwise, I openly bring it. Like, I'm happy, right? But you can't say the work of others a developer.
Okay, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not sure that it comes down to promises. I know Richard didn't promise anything, and the whole community knows that there's no expectations. So no one has a problem with that. But I think the expectations of profit, I think you said it, we're all here for the money. Everyone's here for the money. So there is expectation of profit. And Richard did market this and promote this. I think there
I can
are
answer you straight
facts
away.
about that.
I can answer you straight away. Him discussing a product, telling you what it is not defining as something that you can deem an expectation from his marketing, right? That would be him paying for Hex to be on NASCAR. That would be him paying for Pulsechain to be listed on centralized exchanges. That would be for him paying for billboards. That would be him paying for direct marketing. That would be Pulsechain having a grant program where the Sacrifice wallet or Richard Hart himself, the Pulsechain Foundation, paid for people to build on the chain. That's expectations through managerial and entrepreneurial efforts, right? Him just talking on a stream is absolutely nothing. He's doing nothing for you. So one of the things that Richard did very differently about Hex was it was launched fully decentralized. So it was a fully immutable product, right? No admin keys, launched on the Ethereum blockchain. It didn't pay for a centralized exchange listing. So completely and utterly decentralized. The part in the SEC letter that is brought up to do with Hex is more based around the adoption amplifier, right? Back to where did the ETH go those days? So where did the ETH go? Really died out and now it's being brought back. So where did the ETH go? So the adoption amplifier was what Richard used to call a lobby, right? But realistically, it was done through a smart contract. So people could deposit ETH into the smart contract, and depending on the amount of ETH that was in the smart contract at the end of the day, was your share of that Hex for the day, right? There was about 500 million something Hex every single day put into the adoption amplifier, right? I don't know the exact number. I'm not going to go chasing it right now. It's 500 million, okay? So you put ETH into the contract, into the Hex contract, and at the end of the day, you could claim your share of that adoption amplifier for the day, okay? Now, where did the ETH go? There was a public function in that contract, okay? Public function. So that's a contract. That's not a wallet address signature owned by one individual, okay? It was a public function that you could call on Etherscan, or I think about 2 other different front ends for Hex at the time. Now, that public function is what Richard used to call flush or flushing, right? And that public function would flush the ETH out of the Hex contract into the flush address. Now, the flush address is the part that's always in question, right? The fact of where did the ETH go? Well, the ETH went through a public call function, decentralized. Okay, anybody could have called it to a wallet that somebody could own, a contract could be more in control of. That was where a lot of the questions arose, right? But when you go back to the fundamental facts of how the ETH left the Hex contract into that flush contract, that's the part that's really in question, not necessarily where did the ETH go. Because how the ETH left the Hex contract and moved into the flush contract, like flush address, was decentralized. There was no central entity that could have done it. Okay, anybody could have called that. Now, where did the ETH go? Into the flush contract, okay, in flush address. That's the next part that's in the SEC letter that you see out on Twitter that people have controversy and questions about, okay? That comes back to the adoption amplifier days. It is about questioning Richard Hart whether he is a market maker. So, what is a market maker? A market maker is something that you see every single day in cryptocurrency. Okay, so anybody that runs arbitrage is technically a market maker. Okay, so if you have a price difference between Uniswap and SushiSwap, for instance, right, and you as a market participant, like anybody can do it, right? If you go to SushiSwap and you can get a better deal, so to speak, and go sell it for a profit in Uniswap, technically the act that you just did was arbitrage, okay, because you arbitrage 2 price differences, and that makes you a market maker because you evened out the market. So what's in question in the SEC letter is Richard Hart, and did he participate in market making? Now that is like a very rocky road to go down because again, that is every single day you see market making in cryptocurrency. Okay, people arbitrage between stable coins every single day. It's a fundamental foundation of cryptocurrency that helps keep stable coins at peg. Market makers do that by profiting. All right, whales do that. So what happened back in the adoption amplifier days was Uniswap launched, the Hex liquidity went out into Uniswap V1. I think it was like 3 weeks maybe after the adoption amplifier started. And what arose from that was an arbitrage scenario. So if people were choosing to trade out on Uniswap V1, because maybe they didn't trust the adoption amplifier, speculation, or it was just simpler. Whatever the scenario was that arose, okay, that's not what's in question. What arose was the arbitrage. So the ratio different. Okay, so take away price for a minute and just look at ratios. A little bit like you were ratio trading before there was price discovery on Pulsechain. So if you could get a better ratio through the adoption amplifier than what you could out on Uniswap, people could deposit ETH into the adoption amplifier, get a bunch of hex, and then go dump it on Uniswap V1. Okay, and then go do it again the next day and they would be in profit. That is arbitrage. And that is also what opportunistic people would utilize to take advantage of an ecosystem. So say, for instance, you had a nefarious person. Well, they could do that to extract value out of your ecosystem. Okay, somebody could do that and just be like, oh, look at these idiots. I'm just going to arbitrage between this all day and I'm just going to take money from them. Okay, so the liquidity pool provider out in V1, right, well, they're getting wrecked, right, because they're getting a bunch of hex dumped on them and their ETH taken. Okay, that's arbitrage, and the market participants are the ones that always suffer, and the holders. So what happened in adoption amplifier days was the flush address made some moves, okay, which is known as being a market maker, so to speak, where it would put ETH into the adoption amplifier itself at the end of the day if it's seen a ratio difference between the adoption amplifier and Uniswap V1. Now, the question at play is that market manipulation, or is that something that can't be questioned, right? That's the thing that is in fighting, so to speak, right, when you're basing it on it. But then you also have to look at other things of, like, for instance, what actually deems something a security. Because last time I checked, market making doesn't deem something a security. Market making is more something that the Department of Justice, so to speak, would have to step in on, right? The SEC doesn't actually have grounds to deem any asset a security based off market making. They can deem it, in a sense, back to the flush address. But again, how do you determine who is in control of the flush address for those types of things? Okay, and then you look back at, say, for instance, the Hex OA. Well, the Hex OA never sold a coin. The flush address never sold a coin, right? So it wasn't arbitraging the ratio difference between the adoption amplifier and Uniswap V1 to make profit, right? It wasn't doing that to extract value. It was acting in a sense of, hey, I'm going to fix this problem that I see out here so people don't get wrecked, right? So it acted in good faith. It didn't sell any coins. And nobody really knows who owns the keys for it. And to this day, it didn't sell any coins. So what actually deems assets securities, right? So you can sit there and play the game of where'd the ETH go all day long, right? But they're just the facts of where did the ETH go, right? So where you want to speculate off that and what you can actually base a fact on is very minuscule. So you can't criminally charge somebody and you can't base anything without facts. So those are the only facts that exist, and the blockchain shows, you know, the digital ledger of that happening. Okay, but anything else isn't a fact. It's just hearsay and a speculation. So to sit there and speculate is just crazy, right? But then before I move on, go back to 2019 and 2022, right, when the adoption amplifier was going. Richard Hart said the same things on stream that he says about Pulsechain, right? He literally said back in 2020, early 2020 on stream, that flush address you have no expectations of. If you put ETH into the adoption amplifier, your ETH is gone. Like, you do not have any expectations when somebody presses that public call function to flush the ETH out of the Hex contract into that flush address. You have no expectations of profit. You have no expectations of where that ETH goes or what happens to that ETH. Your ETH is gone, right? He sat there and said it on stream. And one of the things that you cannot question Richard about is his transparency. So back then, he said the same words that he says now, right? Nothing changed. So you have no expectations of profit from the work of others, okay? Nobody had expectations of where did the ETH go. It was just people fighting about where did the ETH go, because that was one of the main critical points that they could find as a FUD scenario for Hex, okay? But again, no expectations. No expectations is constantly taken out of context itself. Okay, so no expectations from the work of others is more in relation to managerial and entrepreneurial efforts for an asset. So again, when Hex was launched, it didn't pay for a centralized exchange listing. That is a managerial and entrepreneurial effort for an asset which would deem it a security. Hex didn't have that. So when Hex was being designed, it was being designed 2 years before it launched. It took 2 years to build Hex, right? So Hex was starting to get developed back in 2017, and it took until 2019 to launch it. So back in 2017, Richard Hart started studying the SEC, and he built a token around securities. You have a man that sat on on YouTube, right, and told you about no expectations, sat there and said, Hex is not a security because I didn't pay for centralized exchange listings. You have no expectations of the work of others. You have no expectations of a flush address, and you have no expectations of me. I will not work for you. I do nothing for you. You interact with a contract if you want to play in the adoption amplifier. You claim your own rewards. If you're a Bitcoin holder, you claim your Hex, you sign a transaction like showing that you own that Bitcoin address, right? And then you can claim your rewards. Nothing was done through any type of central entity. Nothing was done through anything that linked back to him. Nothing was done through anything that wasn't decentralized. It was completely launched decentralized, right? So Hex launched differently to everybody else. And you're talking about a man that studied the SEC and how to launch a cryptocurrency truly decentralized to fail the Howie test back in 2017. Okay, so that was never done before. Okay, so you got to remember that when you constantly start looking at Richard Hart and moving forward from here. Back in 2017, he started studying the SEC, right? He started studying assets on how to deploy them, how to launch them, and how to not be deemed a security. Okay, so failing the Howie test. It failed it the day that it launched, right? You couldn't claim it to be a security back then. Where did the ETH go? Again, have fun speculating that. I told you the facts of what happened with it. The flush address is on the blockchain. You can go back and do whatever you want with it. And then moving up the timeline, you met Richard Hart starting to do outrage marketing, right? Outrage marketing is not managerial or entrepreneurial efforts to deem you a security. So when you look at the Howie test, right, one thing that will deem you a security is if you put your money into a common pool with the expectations of work of others. Okay, so that's, say for instance, you put money into a asset and that asset promises you that they will do a bunch of marketing for you. That asset promises that they will get centralized exchange listings for you. You know, maybe that DAO, for instance, promises that it will use those money that goes into that DAO to go do these things, right? None of that was ever promised. But there is things off to the side of the Howie test that the SEC added on, which is managerial and entrepreneurial efforts. So if you go pay for centralized exchange listings, so to speak, right, that is a managerial effort of you putting forward capital, right, to promote your product, to get it listed. You're being an entrepreneur for your asset that you founded, right? That deems something a security based off what the SEC has written around their regulations. Okay, again, I'm not a lawyer. That's just what's written around off to the side. So Richard doesn't do anything, okay? He's never paid for a centralized exchange listing. He sits there and debates. He says what an asset could do. He tells you about what Hex can do, what it was designed for, and everything around it. But nobody can show you any point in time where Richard went and did something that could be deemed a managerial and an entrepreneurial effort to promote Hex. Okay, that doesn't exist. So for that sake, again, he fails the Howie test. Hex fails the Howie test. It cannot be deemed a security. So then you move forward, right? We're going up the timeline back to the outrage marketing. Now you can speculate whether Richard used to be that person. You can speculate anything that you really want around it. But outrage marketing is a form of doing something to promote yourself that doesn't involve managerial and entrepreneurial efforts, but you still grasp the attention of audiences, right? So regardless of what somebody's saying about you, if they're talking about you, it's working. right? So like if you wanted an example, for instance, of something in relation to that, you look at people like Elon Musk, a really massive name in the world, right? Elon Musk doesn't pay for marketing because why would he? Like Tesla does, blah, blah, but like Elon Musk, for instance, is a little bit smarter than that. So what would he do if he really wanted to garner the attention of the world? Well, he put a bulletproof car on stage that claimed to be bulletproof. And mind you, obviously they did build bulletproof cars, right? I'm not denying that he definitely did. But he put a so-called bulletproof car up on stage, gave a man a heavy weight and said, throw it at the car, it won't break. In front of the whole entire world, the car's like windscreen broke on TV, right? Everybody in the entire world, every news channel, every article, every newspaper was talking about Elon Musk because he put this thing up on stage claiming it to be unbreakable and bulletproof, and it broke on stage. No amount of money in the world can get you that type of advertising, that type of marketing campaign, and that type of attention, right? So that's a form of somebody not paying for marketing, but having the whole entire world looking at them. So then you look back at Richard Hart. And again, you can hate the outrage marketing, or you can just look at it and go, he got a lot of attention, right? A lot of it was hate, but there was attention. And then you move forward to Pulsechain, right? So the other things in the SEC letter is they put Pulsechain and Hex back into it. So when you're looking at Pulsechain, right, how do you try to deem Pulsechain a security? So it's like Hex, right? Don't look at necessarily things around it. Look at the asset itself for a second. Pulsechain has 37,000 community-run validators, right? Those validators are spread all across the world. They're not just based in America. They're not just based in Australia or one central country. So the SEC cannot just walk in and say everybody has to shut it down in America. They're home run PCs. Okay, you can't go around the world and turn them off. The initial validators that Pulsechain was launched with have gone offline. So it is completely and utterly community run and decentralized. You can't actually stop it. What else would make Pulsechain a security? Well, entrepreneurial and managerial efforts. So what do you see in other L1 launches that you don't see in Pulsechain? Well, the biggest one is grant programs. Now that is a managerial and entrepreneurial effort of a blockchain foundation to pay people to build on their chain. That is the definition of a so-called security, because that foundation and that blockchain put in the effort for people to have expectations of the work of them. Okay, so it goes back to no expectations of the work of others. It literally means those types of things, right? So any blockchain, so to speak, underneath the SEC's law that goes out and puts out a grant program and pays people to build on chain, that gives their people that are buying assets on to do with their blockchain expectations of them, right? Expectations of profit from them for their efforts. Pulsechain doesn't have that again. Right? Pulsechain is completely grassroots and community driven. Pulsechain's community goes out and gets people to build on chain. Pulsechain's community builds on chain. Pulsechain's community runs the validators that runs the entire network, right? Pulsex, for instance. Well, anybody can pop open a front end for Pulsex, right? So when you're looking at no expectations of the work of others for profit, everybody comes to crypto for profit, right? Like that's not what's in question. Everybody is here to make money. Anybody that says otherwise is just fooling themselves and trying to fool you, right? Everybody is here to make money. That's not what the SEC really cares about. The SEC wants to try and deem you a security somehow to have control over you, right? To dictate people underneath you, to put fear out there. So all that you need to keep putting back in question is how do things get deemed a security? And that's when people put money into a common pool with the expectations of work of others, right? So again, if you put money into a pool and those people that you gave money to promised that they would go out and do a grant program for you, that they promised that they would go reinvest your funds to give you a return, that they promised that they would go out and do marketing efforts with that money that you gave them. They are expectations. They are what working means, right? That is what putting money into a common pool with other people with the expectations literally defines, right? So we don't have that. Then you go back to managerial efforts. We don't have that. Richard doesn't do a single thing for us or the community, right? And some people get mad about that. And some people say, mean things about that and say that he should do things. But no, he shouldn't, because what he's been doing for the last 3.5 years is protecting our community, right? He tells us what we can do to make things better. He tells us what we can do to get attention, right? So you see out on Twitter people saying that Richard sent hundreds of letters to people's houses. Well, that's completely and utterly false, because Richard would never work for us. Richard would never bother doing that. But he would sit on stream and say, do you want to know what works really well for marketing? Direct marketing. And do you know what the community would do? Go out and do a bunch of direct marketing, right? So you can give great advice. You can give ideas to people, because that's not actually doing work for anybody, right? That's just talking and sharing in discussion. Working for people is when you go out and do it yourself. That is when you have expectations of the work of other people, right? So everybody takes clips of Richard Hart on YouTube and takes it out of context. And for me, that is one of the most hilarious things that I see on Twitter, because him giving a community advice on how to be better, that's great. Like, if anybody has advice, I think anybody should share it, right? And thank you for sharing. But getting mad that he hasn't done a single thing for us, I'm sorry, but that is what defines us to everybody. And that's what defines us with the SEC. We do not have expectations of him. He will never work for us, and we know that he never will. He never has, and he's not going to start today, right? And then you go play with the sacrifice addresses, right? Because obviously they're going to come into question. Well, it's a little bit like the Hex OA, right? The Hex OA has never sold a coin. Say, for instance, the SEC wanted to pinpoint the OA for some whatever reason, right? And wanted to really target it. One of the reasons why the whole entire crypto space needs to get behind Hex, right? And the OA, for instance, right? Because the OA has never sold a coin. It has never given expectations to anybody. It has never acted in a sense where it gave people the expectation of profit. And it's never acted in the sense where it paid for marketing. It didn't pay for shills. It didn't pay for anything, right? It just staked some tokens to reduce the APY, so to protect Hex, but it never sold a coin. Now, if Hex had any issues with the SEC over that OA, that's when a massive issue comes across the entire crypto space. Look at Vitalik, for instance, right? Now, I adore Ethereum, so let's not take my words out of context again, right? Like, I actually really love Ethereum. Vitalik sells the top every year, literally. I have shared on my Twitter before the last time he sold the top, and he sits on stream and he literally giggles about it, saying, yeah, I got the Ethereum Foundation to sell the top. Okay, he has said that on camera, not I sold the top on the day. I got the Ethereum Foundation to sell the top. Okay, the Hex OA has never sold a coin. The ETH Foundation sells the top. They sell coins every cycle. That is technically, crossing borders. Okay, Chainlink sells the top, right? So if you want to do blockchain analysis, you want to take other people's words and actions and what their wallets have done, you get into really risky territory. And that's what I kind of say when I sit on my Twitter and say Hex actually kind of defines a lot. And I'm not just saying because XRP made this huge wave. XRP made a huge wave for blockchains, right? For decentralization. But Hex has so many different points where it beats the SEC. It fails the Howie test. And it stops the SEC from taking it for a security, right? But say, for instance, worst case scenario, which I don't think can happen personally, right? But say worst case, it did take Hex for being a security. Hex fails every single point of the Howie test. So if Hex was deemed a security, the whole entire crypto space is screwed, right? It has never paid for a centralized exchange listing. It launched Complete, a fully complete product, immutable, no admin keys. Right? There was no wallet address that divvied out tokens. It was a contract. Even the contract between the Hex contract and the flush address was a public call function, right? There was no like wallet with an admin key that allowed them to get in there and get the ETH out of the Hex contract. It was a public call function, which is completely decentralized, right? Because anybody could have called it. The Hex OA has never sold a coin. So again, when you're looking at Hex and you're looking at the crypto space as a whole, you run into risky territory, right? So when I look at Twitter again, I find it absolutely hilarious to me when people sit there and they wish for the death of Hex and they wish for it to be deemed a security just based off their pure dislike for Richard Hart. But they cannot comprehend the gravity of what it would actually entail for the whole entire crypto space if Richard did have Hex deemed as his security. Like, it is massive and people need to understand that. And then, you know, going back to sacrifices, back in 2020, 2019, when it launched, he talks about the adoption amplifier. He says on stream, no expectations. If you sacrifice, like, he doesn't say sacrifice. If you send money to the adoption amplifier, your ETH is gone. He says, don't have any expectations of where it goes. None at all. No expectations of me. If you put ETH into the adoption amplifier, it's done. It's gone. You never see it again. He's sacrificed for Pulsechain. No expectations of the work of others. If you send money, you send coins to the address, you have no expectation, you'll never see it again. Pulsex address. If you send coins there, have no expectations, you'll never see it again, right? So those are the things that are in question. Whether people can try and speculate and put additional things onto the side of it, they're most welcome to come up and try and put additional things onto the side of it. But there really isn't much in the sense of actually deeming an asset a security, right? So maybe something was done in an improper way, right? But how do you actually deem some action that took place? How do you deem an asset a security when it's completely decentralized? Because you can't, because you have to separate the asset itself. Hex can't really be deemed a security, and it would be rather funny to me if they even got to the point where it could be. Because again, it is truly decentralized. It was launched decentralized. It's immutable. It's untouchable. It's had flawless uptime for 3.5 years. Nothing gone wrong with it. It doesn't take your money, right? And then people say, well, everybody that invested lost money. That's completely untrue, right? Like, even back to the market making days between V1 and the adoption amplifier. You find me one person that participated in that adoption amplifier, right, that couldn't have sold for profit. Like, go on the blockchain and find me one that couldn't have sold for profit. Because after the adoption amplifier, Hex went on to do 1,000x. Right, from the price of the adoption amplifier, not the price from the bottom. The price from the bottom did a 10,000x, right, because it did take a dump after. But find people that participated in the adoption amplifier that couldn't have sold for a profit somewhere because they could have, right? So again, when you're going back to every aspect that people bring up, you go into price. Well, Hex is down 98%. Okay, at the bottom of a bear market, anybody that says Hex is dead because it's down, every altcoin's down, right? If you were running victory laps in a bull market and a token was down 95%, then I'm probably going to pay attention to you and I'll be like, okay, something went wrong there. But if you're going to say those things at the bottom of a bear market, like, where do you find grounds to make comments like that when everything is down? Okay, so like, people's comments out on Twitter and people's comments around certain things, they just don't make sense to me, right? Even the SEC's letter doesn't make sense to me. It's literally written in the SEC's letter about the case around Richard Hart that he misappropriated user funds to spend 12 million or whatever it was on luxurious items instead of marketing Pulsechain, right? It literally says that inside of the SEC's letter. Instead of marketing Pulsechain, he bought luxurious items. Okay, why would he market Pulsechain with so-called misappropriated user funds that we gave with no expectations, that we knew he was never going to give any managerial or entrepreneurial efforts for us? Why would he use those funds to go market Pulsechain? Because if he did what was written in the SEC's letter, that would deem Pulsechain a security, right? If Richard went out and used any money for marketing, it instantly deems Pulsechain a security. A truly decentralized blockchain could be deemed a security just based off that sentence alone, right? So the main thing in the Howie test is the no, like, putting money into a common pool with the expectations. But there is things written around the Howie test that can still deem it one. And those managerial efforts is one of those. So Pulsechain will never have a grant program. It will never pay for marketing. And the fact that the SEC even put that in the letter just shows you that they're trying to find any way possible to deem it a security because they don't have fundamental grounds to sit on, right? And then they put in like aspects about jail time. Like that's ludicrous because they're not the Department of Justice, right? So like a certain influencer on Twitter ran with that and made a big wave of it. Well, that person knows very well that they're not the Department of Justice, but it did spike further conversations on Twitter. You know, I went into a Twitter space with a so-called lawyer sitting in there, and the lawyer was saying, oh, but you know, these things run in parallel, and if the SEC has a case, chances are that there's one on to the side. No, because the Department of Justice, you can look up cases, right? And there is no case. There is no public case, no public civil case against Richard Hart with the Department of Justice. That doesn't exist. They don't always run in parallel because you need fundamental foundation to do any type of lawsuit, right? You need factual evidence. Like other people will come to me and say, oh, Richard used to talk to me when he launched Hex and like, I know this and I know that. Show me, send me the evidence. Oh, I don't have it. So why do you think your words hold any ground, right? Like I get DMs all the time, right? And where is the factual evidence to prove it, right? Because anybody can say anything to anyone. I can sit up here and say, Corey, DM me, you know, this, but he didn't do it, but I can still say it. Right? It doesn't hold up in a court of law. It means absolutely nothing. You can write anything that you want out on Twitter, but unless you have evidence for it, it means jack shit, literally, right? So my DMs are full all the time of crap, and I just laugh at them. Like it's hilarious to me. I had one today telling me that Richard used to DM him this and this, and show me, like, please, I'll just sit here and wait for it. But nobody can provide factual information behind it. You know, people will say, oh, the Sacrafice address did this or the HexOA did this. Send me the transaction hash. Like, send it to me and I will look at it. No, I can't. You have to go find it. Okay, so you want me to go do blockchain analysis for a month on end to try and prove a point that you think exists, but you actually have no fundamental foundation for it. You probably just read it somewhere and you're rolling with it because you just don't like Richard Hart. So you're just finding something to cling on to, right? That's the point where we're at with crypto Twitter, where people are just trying to find pretty much anything that they can to grasp onto just to talk crap, right? It's the time and place where you start saying, well, show me the proof. Send me the transaction hash. Show me the DMs then. Show me where Richard Hart said that he's just here for the money. Show me where he said any of it, because I can guarantee you don't have it, right? So the SEC doesn't have anything if you can't provide it, right? Like if you look out on Twitter, for instance, I'll go back to Twitter. Everybody sits there and they say this and they say that. How many people have put up a photograph to back what they're saying? Like, can somebody send me a Twitter post with it? Because I can't find it, right? So again, you know, I fall victim because I reply to trolls and I know that I shouldn't, right? But if you want to go back to the assets themselves and try and deem them a security, you know, that's a conversation I would happily indulge in. And if you truly have a fundamental case of why you believe it fails the Howie test, like, please come up and share it, right? Like, I openly invite people to come up and share their perspective, especially if it's opposing to mine, because you need to prove to me how it failed the Howie test, where people put money into a pool with the expectation of profit from the work of others. Okay, that literally means the FTXs, right? The Lunas. You give money to an entity that promises you a return of profit, right? That promises you that they will go out and do something with that money to give you something in return. Well, Hex doesn't do that. You know, you can say it promises you an APY, but that's just math and calculation, right? It literally can say it can pay you an APY because that's built into the immutable code, right? You're not giving your money into a common pool. You're not giving it to an entity. You're signing a smart contract, an immutable smart contract on the blockchain. You are making the agreement with your own private keys, with your own wallet, right? You're making that agreement. You're making it to get a certain amount of Hex back for your length and your size of your stake. But you hold your own keys. You hold your own Hex. There is no common pool. It's just a smart contract that you interact with. So show me the common pool where people put money in with the expectation of profit from other people, and you show me the things off to the side. Like, where are the managerial and entrepreneurial efforts from Richard Hart to promote Hex and Pulsechain? Right? Where does he pay for grants for people to build on Pulsechain? Where does he pay for centralized exchange listings? Where does he pay for direct marketing? Where did he pay for the NASCAR? Where did he pay for anything that the community has done? Like, there's a comment that Richard could disappear and everything falls apart. Do you really believe that? Like, in deep down in your heart, I think we would all miss him. But at the end of the day, there's about 40 different front ends for Hex. Pulsechain is completely decentralized and run by community validators. Pulsex can have front ends built for it in a day, less than a day, right? You can interact with everything on the block explorers from a contract-based level themselves, right? If hex.com went down, there's still alternative options. Like, it is that decentralized, and our community is that decentralized. So if Richard disappeared, what happens, right? There was maybe like one comment that I seen which didn't get answered, to be honest, from what I saw, of somebody saying, well, if Richard disappeared and he owns 90% of the supply, or if he got arrested by the US government, right? If they arrested him and took his ledger, for instance, and that means that they confiscated the Hex OA keys, right? And now they have all the coins. What would happen? Hex would fail. Do you really believe a man that started back in 2017 thinking about building Hex around deeming it not a security, that started back in 2017 designing ways to avoid the Howie test, right? A man that sat there for 2 years before his product even launched, studying these things like the back of his hand, right? We've literally seen him on stream with lawyers schooling them on the Howie test because they didn't even know the Howie test themselves, right? You're telling me that man would be dumb enough to make the one most obvious fundamental flaw of having the keys on him, so if he ever got arrested, that the SEC could take over the Hex OA. Like, do you really think, right, in your heart of heart, that the design would be that fundamentally flawed and he would be that dumb? The man that has outsmarted every single person in cryptocurrency, the man that launched the one and only truly decentralized crypto that exists today, right? Hex is the only truly decentralized thing, okay, other than Pulsechain, but we'll just going back to Hex, right? Is the only truly decentralized thing that's launched, right? You're telling me that guy would leave that big of a loophole? Like, some of the comments are just crazy, right? Like, no, I don't think Hex would fail if Richard went away. I don't think the government could find the keys or the contract that controls that thing, right? No. Like, come on, guys. 2017, he started his idea. Like, the man's been going around it for ages. And I actually missed something myself, right? When you're talking about deeming something a security, one of those little loopholes that are around the common pool, other than the managerial and entrepreneurial efforts, is a likeness, right? And it's the most craziest thing, but the SEC can use that to make you pass the Howie test to deem your security, is a likeness, right? So if you have a product or an asset that's alike another product that is a security, then you could technically be deemed a security. So Richard Hart has been that smart that from the very beginning, what is the one thing that he compares Hex to constantly? And there's a lot of things you could compare it to, right? He compares it to something even more than a certificate of deposit. What does he say the most out of everything? He compares it to Bitcoin. So around the Howie test, there is something off to the side, right? It's there, and it is a likeness. So Bitcoin's deemed the only thing that's not a security, so to speak, right? Like, I don't agree with that, but it is. So you can't even deem Hex a security on a likeness, like a product likeness, because the one thing that it is mainly alike, like majority alike, is Bitcoin, with a couple of differences, right? Bitcoin miners mine Bitcoin to keep the network running, right? Hex users mint their own rewards, mint their own Hex for like accomplishing their agreement that they made with a contract. So the thing that is most alike is not a security as well. So those are the three main things around an asset that'll make it a security, right? And if you want to go back to Pulsechain, what's it most alike? Well, ETH, right? So Ethereum really isn't going to be deemed a security, right? And again, if you want to go back to the ETH Foundation and them selling, right? If you want to go back to the ETH Foundation and doing expectations because they do work, okay? There is some loopholes there, but for ETH to be deemed a security would be honestly groundbreaking and something that I truly don't see happening. Right. So if you want to go back to the likeness, no, it'd be very difficult to deem Pulsechain a security based off Ethereum. Okay. Like the SEC is one of the biggest jokes in the world, right? What they tried to do was good. What they tried to do was protect investors. But when you sit there and you ask yourself, what did the SEC actually become? The SEC became something that makes the rich people richer and the poor people poorer. Like literally, right? So who can invest in something that is technically a security, et cetera, et cetera? And Richard said it before, and it is extremely true. Accredited investors, right? So the SEC is an accredited investor's best friend. And what's an accredited investor? They're somebody with millions of dollars, right? So if you're an accredited investor, you can invest in so-called securities, right? In ICO fundraisings, so to speak, right? So the rich people can invest in these things because they are rich enough to get deemed an accredited investor, which just means that you won't go bankrupt, so to speak, if you lost a bunch of money, right? You're accredited because you have a bunch of money. So the people that really need the mad gains are the people that they're trying to stop, right? The SEC jumps in after FTX has collapsed. So what do they really do? They constantly just harm the little guys. They harm you by trying to put things in our ICO category. They harm you by trying to put in those rules to begin with, so only the rich people can invest. And then the SEC also just comes in after the fact, like you've seen with FTX again, right? Where they literally hold up user funds. So anything that gets taken back doesn't go straight back to the users, right? They go in there and they go, we're going to protect you. But really, they just allowed for all the user money to disappear, right? That's literally what the SEC does. And it is unfortunate because I think maybe they had a great idea around them, but that is what they do. Poor people get poorer, rich people get richer. But it just goes back to the Howie test. And how do you deem something a security? And do you really call outrage marketing and a man's taste in style a way to deem something a security? Like, that's not how it works, right? That's just going back to basing somebody off a dislike for them, right? And again, if you want to go back to Richard Hart, people say that he sells Hex and that's how he got all his money. Okay. But you guys also say that he has millions of ETH from a flush address that he had no expectations of and he probably controls. So why would he ever have to sell Hex, right? He was mining Bitcoin back at 50 cents and he told you all that he sold the top, right? So if you invested $1 million, $10 million, right? And you got 100x out of any altcoin, if you got a 10x in Bitcoin, you got a 50x over here. Do you really think he needs $12 million from a Sacrafice wallet to buy some clothes? Like, do you really think so? Like, that's chump change to somebody that has a bunch of money, right? He tells you when the top's in. That means he's selling the top as well, right? So, you can't base a security around what somebody does. And again, if you want to go back to why does somebody do those types of things? Well, you need to compare it to other people that do those types of outrageous things, which are people like Elon Musk. Again, with the car that supposedly was bulletproof. He had the whole entire world talking about him for free because he pulled a stunt, right? He obviously knew that the windows that were going up there at that time were not bulletproof, but he did it anyway. And the whole world talked about him. Richard Hart went out and did things that have never been done before, made a bunch of noise. Back in Hex days, his type of outrage marketing to help build his name was debating everybody, right? The whole entire space would talk about him. It's really hard to go through all of those debates, right? And then find something to outdo that to again become the biggest noise in the space. Because if you look at, I don't want to say their name, but other scammers, they have a big name at the moment in the crypto space. They have a lot of attention, a lot of engagement, people watching them. How do you constantly top those people to be the top engagement, to be the one that people talk about all the time? You have to start doing outrageous things to be at the top if that's what you want. right? So you watch Richard go out and do more outrageous things. You know, the highest of stakes, for instance. Well, that's a great way to get audience from outside of our ecosystem, right? For the whole entire world to start seeing crypto. But when you're talking about in the space, how do you get people's attention in such a loud space already? Like, how do you do it? If you were going to go out and do it today, what would you do that would make you stand out from everybody, right? Like, the man is here for glory. The man is here to change people's lives. You can hate him, you can agree with him, you can think he is a con man, or you can believe him, right? It doesn't matter which way that you want to think about it. If a man is here looking for glory, at what point do you think he's going to do something so dumb to get himself locked up in jail, right? At what point do you think he's not going to think about everything that he's doing? He started back in 2017 working out how to dodge all of these things, and he's dodging them, right? So, you know, it's hard for me to articulate so many things into a tweet, but people need to understand that there's more facts around things than what people are actually saying. Going back to the adoption amplifier, there's more facts around the adoption amplifier than anybody's saying. Like, I'm going to get off this call, and when I do, I'll go find that video of Richard sitting on stream where he said no expectations with a flush address. No expectations of anything. I'll never work for you, right? If you send ETH to the adoption amplifier, your ETH's gone, right? Like, he said it back then and he says it now. Like, nothing has changed, right? So SBF lied to you. He didn't tell you what he was doing. Everybody else in the space lies to you and doesn't tell you what they're doing. They say, give me your money into this common pool and I'll go generate you more money, but they don't tell you what they're doing. He has been the most transparent from the beginning, right? He's told you the whole entire way. He's never lied. He's always said, I'm going to go do this. You can't have expectations of this. I will never work for you. I will never do anything for you, right? So the most transparent and controversial man in crypto, it is what it is.